Hello, hello. I'm Ben Munster. I'm a senior Hormuz correspondent temporarily. And this panel is about energy security. Energy security beyond, the sort of basic idea of energy security being, about just having security of supply, being able to guarantee supplies, but also physical security. Making sure that grids aren't vulnerable to attacks from Russia, for instance. And then cybersecurity as well, given there's increasing sort of concerns around, Chinese influence over offshore wind and stuff like that. I think it's a very fascinating topic, and I'm very happy to have four very interesting people here today. First, to my left here is Alexandre Monneget. I hope my pronunciation was all right. Who leads sort of NATO's efforts to counter sort of hybrid threats across a range of different areas, but it also encompasses grids, energy infrastructure. Then there's Olena Pavlenko, who's the president of Dixie Group, and she is a leading Ukrainian energy expert with direct experience navigating wartime energy disruptions. Obviously, Ukraine has been at the fulcrum of this discussion because it faced these sort of brutal attacks over the winter, knocked out massive swathes of its energy architecture, and they've learned a lot from that experience. So it'll be very interesting to hear what lessons they have learned and how they're sort of prepared for the next winter. We have Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, sort of the Renaissance man of the Parliament's energy scene. He sort of weighs in on everything, but also has a lot of experience, direct experience dealing with Russian energy issues, I think that's fair to say. So we'll have a lot of insight there. And Jakub Wnuczynski, who promotes offshore wind. So one of the very interesting things here, I think, is this idea of renewables being seen as not only a way to sort of, help accelerate the green transition, but also as useful because they are sort of, more decentralized and they're more secure because they're homegrown. So it's in some senses, it's literally physically harder to blow them up if you're a hostile state because, an offshore wind farm is much more distributed. So Jakub promotes the security benefits of offshore wind. I suppose the first thing I wanted to start with, I think I wanted to be a fairly freewheeling discussion, was I wanted to ask you, Alexandra, what do you, from a NATO perspective, what do you think is the biggest threat facing Europe's energy infrastructure? And then I would sort of like you all to sort of respond to it, sort of build on it, or debate it, or whatever.
No, thank you very much, Ben, and thank to Politico for inviting me today. There are many threats to energy security, and I think our colleague from Ukraine could really speak about it. I think what we see today is really energy as a target. We've seen it in Ukraine since 2022. We see that Russia is targeting energy infrastructures on a daily basis. It started with cyber attacks, massive cyber attacks, but also kinetic attacks, missiles, drone, and that's something we have to really to think about in Europe, because we see that every day. Europe, Russia is attacking Ukraine and Ukraine energy infrastructures, but they are also attacking our infrastructures through hybrid attacks. Let me give you some example. Cyber attacks. You had a massive cyber attack in Poland last December that impacted 30 power stations and could have impacted thousands of people. So that's one example. We'll see that the Russians are mapping our critical undersea infrastructures. We've seen incidents in the Baltic Sea, so that's also a risk to our energy infrastructures. We see also cyber pre-positioning, and we have colleagues from industry that can speak about it. So that's the kind of threats we are seeing today. Another element that we have to take into account is the access to energy. We have still a lot of dependencies in Europe. We were very dependent on Russia's oil and gas. We are shifting from that successively, but we still need a lot of energy in the future, and especially for our military capabilities to be able to deter and defend. And that's an important factor because while we are transitioning in Europe, and it's a very good thing, we need to think about having enough energy to be able, in the future, to continue to deter and defend.
So currently, how prepared are we? And how screwed are we, you know?
We are, I think, much prepared than we were a few years ago. I think we have been learning very fast from Ukraine. We are observing, we are working closely with them, but it's about taking action and taking the right decisions today. And we need to think very strategically. We should not shift from one dependency on Russian oil and gas to supply chain dependency, in particular vis-à-vis China, and that's an important factor to take into account.
This might be a good moment to go to Olena, actually. I mean, Olena, how prepared do you think we are, you know, given this context that Alexandra has just articulated, how ready do you think Ukraine is to deal with, you know, further attacks next year and also the sort of ongoing cyber threat that you know, that we're seeing?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. First of all, I have to say that we are constantly learning from what is happening on the front line and in our energy sector. And this learning doesn't stop. So what happened in 2022 doesn't mean the similar will happen in 2026 in the winter. So in 2022, we had one attack on one generation unit, for example. Now we have attacks on all the systems. In 2022, we had one drone per, or two, three drones per one generation unit. Now we have the swarm drones on transformer or generation unit. So Russia is changing its tactics, and it's really hard to predict how the situation will and how the attacks will look like even in autumn this year. I have to say that we are preparing to the extent we can. We built 3, sometimes 4 levels of protection of our energy system. We built our resilience at 3 levels: national level, regional level, community. And also, I have to say that all the citizens in Ukraine, after so many winters without electricity, we also are trying to build our energy resilience at our own personal level. So we do whatever we can do in order to prepare the winter, but there might be some new tactics which Russia will use in autumn and winter.
I mean, what's the main way you're building out energy resilience? I mean, what's one of? I mean, renewables. As I mentioned before, renewables have been identified as like a key way that Ukraine can sort of decentralize its energy system. I mean, is that something you're looking at seriously, or is it like a tiny part of a much bigger picture?
I was thinking how to answer your question to your previous question to the colleague from NATO, and I have to say that. If we talk about different threats, which to prioritize, I have to say that balancing generation, this is something which is super important to protect.
What's that?
Balancing regeneration.
Oh, right.
In Ukraine, it's thermal power generation, hydropower generation. But if we talk about decarbonized system, that would be, I believe, hydropower and batteries. So if you have even good electricity system, good renewables generation, you back up it with batteries, they also should be very well protected. And in some countries, heard the state secretary before, they have a lot of thermal power plants, coal-fired thermal power plants, which became the first target in Ukraine since 2022, and they are damaged the most. So I think those countries have to start thinking how to protect such balancing generation in the first place.
Is there a risk of sort of, you know, I don't want to sort of, it might be a slightly extreme view, but I mean, is there a risk if you're buying more renewables and building out renewables architecture, then you're exposing yourself to sort of cybersecurity risks, you know, instead of sort of, you know, making your system more vulnerable to Russian attacks? Is that trade-off there? I'd also be interested in hearing from your perspectives on that.
We have this discussion in Ukraine. Basically, the question is of data protection and how to find a balance between opening the data and close the data in the energy sector. Because if you need faster, more decentralized, more electrified electricity system, you will have to deal with more digitalization and also with data openness, right? And exchange of data. But for such aggressors as Russia, it means easier targets. And this is still the lessons which has to be learned, and we all have to find an answer how to find this balance between opening the data to show it to business, to investors, to communities, but also close the data which really can expose easy targets. And with geolocation, which is very open and accessible in European countries now, I have to say this is a serious question.
Do you want to weigh in, I think, Thomas, on this issue about, we had a little bit of a discussion before about sort of, weighing the merits of discussing which is more of a threat, whether it's sort of, Russia as the immediate sort of, hostile nation on our borders, or China with these, which potentially could end up monopolizing renewables in Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So I was a researcher for a decade and I'm now a politician, so let me first say a politician thing and then go back to research and provide a bit of data here. I think the first duty of a politician is to prioritize. Is there a Chinese plan to deindustrialize Europe and therefore ensuring Chinese dominance over Europe? Yes, of course. But currently there is a Russian war that is killing thousands of Europeans. And the only thing that is stopping Russia to kill more people is the Ukrainian army. And this is not something for the next decade, this is something that is happening now. Sergei Karaganov, who is one of the geopolitical advisors to Putin, said that on Russian TV last December. He said, and I'm quoting him, "This war is not about Ukraine, it is about Europe. And this war will never stop until Russia has inflicted onto Europe a moral and political defeat." End of quote. So to me, I think our number one priority on everything needs to be victory for Ukraine and peace on the European continent. Peace, by the way, because many people talk about that now, the way you achieve a lasting peace, at least throughout European history, is first through victory. We did not negotiate with Adolf Hitler. We defeated him, and then we made peace with Germany. And I think that should be the way forward. Linking that to energy, the entire Russian economy rests on oil and gas. The only way for us, or at least maybe not the only way, but at least one very valid theory of victory for us against the war that Russia started against us Europeans is the global clean energy transformation. Why? Because the moment we take Russian oil and gas money away, Russia won't have the economic capacity to wage war. If you look back in 2024, for instance, the Russian military budget was 140 billion, so 140. The Russian oil and gas revenues were 250 billion. So we don't even need to get to net zero emissions to dismantle the Russian economy. If we just get halfway there, more or less, we win. We win. And that to me should be the priority. Looking at our energy system, we talked a lot about electricity mostly for now, but electricity is a very minor part of the European energy system. Currently, there is only 23% of the energy we consume in Europe that is channeled through electricity. The vast majority of the energy we consume in Europe is first oil and second gas. Just oil and gas account for 2/3 of our energy. And this is an energy source that we do not have in Europe. So in Europe, we produce 3% of oil. The single most important energy source in Europe is something we only produce 3% of. The second most important energy source in Europe is gas. We produce only 10% of what we consume. And electricity, which is a very important energy vector, is actually this thing that we can actually produce. And we already produce more than 100% of our electricity, like we even export electricity, a little bit of electricity to non-EU states. And we have the capacity with offshore wind and with many other technologies to produce more. So if we wanted to be serious, we should invest in clean energy, obviously for climate reasons, especially after the heat wave last week in France that killed more than 10 people. But even if climate change did not exist, clean energy investment should be a national security priority for Europe.
Also as energy infrastructure security, you know, a way to guarantee the security of energy infrastructure as well. I mean, you know, you're talking about the green transition. This is as a way to basically help wean the world off Russian fossil fuels, or fossil fuels in general, which would include Russian fossil fuels. But I mean, in the sort of more practical sense of infrastructure, I mean, do you see it as a more immediate solution? I mean, I guess this would be a good question for Jakob, because can you explain how you're sort of promoting energy security through offshore wind and how that's going? I mean, what is your argument? How is an offshore wind platform more secure than importing barrels of oil or super tankers full of liquefied natural gas or whatever?
Thank you, Ben. Right now, one of the biggest vulnerability for Europe is that we import a lot of the energy from outside the Europe, and all of us mentioned it already. So right now we need to build and create the new sources of the energy, and offshore wind perfectly fit to this strategy, to this idea. From the moment of the political decision to the moment of the decision of the building of the new offshore wind farms, till when this farm starts generating the new electricity, takes around 6 to 8 years. So it's the fastest source of the new energy right now available in Europe. And
it's quite a long time though, still.
It's not long, because when you look at the other big investments into the new sources to produce the electricity and energy, it takes much longer. When we look at the nuclear power plants, it takes decades. No one right now is going to invest into the coal power plants. You have a few other energy sources, but not big scale like offshore wind. For the offshore, we are talking about the gigawatts of the energy from the single project. So right now in Europe, we have a quite ambitious target to build a new offshore wind energy project, but the targets need to be switched right now into the real project, into the execution phase. And it's quite easy reachable. But right now, those targets need to be met in the coming years. We're waiting year after year when this curve and this quite dynamic growth, the offshore wind industry will start. But right now, we need the industry to build and deliver all of the key components. We cannot also rely with such vulnerable projects and expensive, and we need to be well coordinated on the key components only from the outside the Europe. We need to build an industry. And the example of the Ukraine shows us perfectly that we need to be also able to react fast to if we need to rebuild the industry, if we need to deliver the goods to the market, and if we need to produce the components, having the industry in Europe, especially in the offshore wind sector, gives us a big advantage, because we are talking about the cost, and the offshore wind energy produced from the offshore wind is one of the cheapest energy right now we have in Europe. But the cost by not having the industry in Europe will be much higher than building of the new facilities. And the Baltic Towers right now is a great example that we build a brand new facility in Poland, Gdańsk, on the Baltic Sea region, when the Baltic Sea has a great potential in the new offshore wind project development. But we also need to be aware that the offshore is our product. Offshore has been built in Europe on the North Sea decades.
I'd be interested in hearing the NATO perspective on this, because on the one hand, you said you agree that building out renewables is very good for energy security. But on the other hand, I mean, we still do need to import fossil fuels. We still do need to use fossil fuels. And military vehicles, for instance, fighter jets aren't going to be running on, sustainable oil anytime soon. How do we balance this? How do we balance these two sort of competing demands? I mean, do you find it? Is it more complicated than our co-panelists here are making it out? Yeah, basically.
No, good question. A colleague from the European Parliament just mentioned that as a politician, he has to prioritize. From a NATO perspective, security and defense is a priority. So that's something we need really to factor in. And speaking about what we are doing with offshore wind. This is excellent, but the best is to think about security by design. So when you build new facilities, think about cyber security. And with AI coming, it's very important to have very robust cyber security by design. think about the protection from drones, because that's a risk that is coming. We've seen a lot of drones incursions. So that's something you have to think about and take lessons from Ukraine. Ukraine have been implementing active and passive measures to protect their critical energy infrastructure. So that's something from a NATO perspective that we really recommend to all allies, is to think about the security of your energy infrastructures at large.
Thomas wants to say. By the way, you can just interrupt each other. You don't have to. I don't get permission from me.
No, but I mean,
just shout over each other.
Sorry, but my mother raised me well. So,
I don't think mine did.
Maybe for the audience that is not super familiar on defense, so active and passive measures, as you mentioned. So active measures would be, for instance, you have missiles or any type of gun that can shoot down the drone, while passive measures would be things that make you more resistant and hopefully therefore more resilient. For instance, you build, I don't know, a concrete bunker, let's say, around a specific part of your energy system. But if we look, the major weakness that we have now in Europe is that we import oil through ships. And we have been seeing for 3 months how unresilient, how weak those oil tankers are. They were just, I don't know, like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 oil tankers that managed to cross the Hormuz Strait for like 3 months. That is by far the biggest energy security concern. And there are a few active measures we could do actually to protect them, but very limited. And the passive measures for oil tankers, like you can't really build a concrete shelter around an oil tanker. However, we have the capacity through renewable electricity to generate the type of liquid fuel, like jet fuel, that the military needs. Back in March, together with EPP members of the European Parliament, including a former general from Portugal, we visited the Ineratec plant, and that's a plant close to Frankfurt in Germany that is using renewable electricity, that is using domestic CO2 and also hydrogen in that specific case, in order to generate kerosene, essentially, so to generate jet fuel. That is first and foremost originally a climate tech company. The technology was developed by people who 10 years ago said, we need to go for climate, and one of the elements that we need to do is to find a way to produce much cleaner jet fuel. And now, for a couple of years, the company that has invested a lot of money in Ineratec is Rheinmetall, the German defense giant, because they see this also as something that is essential for resilience. So what I hope is that we can move forward, because currently in Parliament we have a very silly debate between people that say, oh, we need to do that for security, and people who say we need to do that for climate. At the end of the day, regardless of the reason why you are doing it, it actually works for both climate and security. So to me, we need to, as the German would say, it's aufheben. We need to overcome that kind of false dichotomy, and we also need to do that because it will allow us to deliver a political coalition that can sustain that effort over time. Rome was not built in a day, and our clean energy transformation will not happen in a week. We need to have a constant and coherent policy framework over the next 20 years, ensuring that our system is both climate neutral and resilient and secure by design.
I'm aware that Elena has to leave soon. Could I mean, actually in 5 minutes, but can I ask you sort of, to follow up on that? I mean, I'd be interested, are you seeing in Ukraine any issues with, military energy supplies in the wake of, I guess, the war in Iran especially? I mean, is that another sort of vector of this energy security issue? Like, vehicles not having enough fuel and stuff like that? And how are you sort of working to guarantee that they do have enough fuel, if that is an issue?
Thank you. If I may elaborate a bit on the previous question and to help to add one more argument why renewables is also an energy security enhancement. One of Russia's tactics is to divide energy proficit regions from energy deficit regions, which actually Ukraine is an example of. And I know that there are some EU countries which also have the same. They have energy proficit regions and energy deficit regions. So renewables and building renewables across the country will help to solve this problem or reduce this threat in case of any attacks. Moreover, I think it also will answer the question which you discussed on grids package, because if you talk about energy deficit and energy proficit countries within the EU, this better coordination between the countries within the EU, I don't know about centralization, but coordination is one of the key to ensure the proper security and in case of something, the fast electricity flow between different countries. Now the question of gas and oil in Ukraine, I have to say that Ukraine is a gas-producing country, and I have to admit that it helps us to go through war and also to go through all the winters. Because we have to rely on gas now, we install massively cogeneration units before the new heating season in order to somewhere it's just the only source, somewhere it will be a backup for the electricity generation in case of additional attacks. So we do have our own gas production. We do have some quite reasonable gas in storages, but we'll probably need more before, not probably, we will need more before the winter season. We are working on this. In terms of the fuel, so far as I know, despite Ukraine receives all the fuel from the EU countries, there is no shortage as of now. We do have a very diversified trade and a lot of traders who work on this market, so we had tried to adapt. And so far, Ukraine doesn't have shortages. But yes, we will have to prepare very well before the winter to have enough stocks and to have enough access. And if I may, 2 more minutes, I would like to mention about the importance of stock as one of the lessons learned, because if we talk about transformers or some grid elements, which in Ukraine are example of easy targets, the lessons learned for the EU would be to start thinking about such stockpiling within the EU. And I think the new energy security framework, which should be published soon, will have such a mention or thinking about that. And if I know that there are discussions how to finance this, who will pay for that. Again, would encourage to think about 1.5% from NATO resilience sector of fund, yes, which is going to be filled. Probably this would be something which could help to create such stockpiles. And as a oil and gas producing countries,
stockpiles of fossil fuels or
no, you do
everything.
have already a very good platform to procure gas.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the equipment. I'm talking about the equipment for the electricity system, like transformers, grid elements for grids, something which is very important if you need to restart your electricity system very fast. And again, it's important if you talk about further electrification of the energy system. And to finish, I will just say that as an oil and gas producing country, Ukraine will also probably contribute with this in the next 5, 10, 7 years to build energy resilience in Europe. As far as we have the oil and gas as a backup and we need diversification of oil and gas supply, Ukraine as a future EU member state could help to make gas a transit fuel, safe transit fuel, and then move towards full electrification.
Can I ask? Oh yeah, sure.
If we talk about the safety, we discuss about the cyber security, but this is the clear example what I now just mentioned, that we need to have a supply chain available in the short time. We need to be able to react fast. We need to be able to react with the proper quantity when it's needed, because even if you have a sufficient financial resources available, you cannot just in the build the tanks, as we had the example on the Ukraine, from the cash itself. Someone need to produce it, someone need to deliver it to the market. And if we have an industry in Europe close to the future field where we execute the offshore wind projects, we can deliver fast, we can react fast. This is also the way to minimize the risks for the energy sector.
Can I ask both of you something very quickly? When Olena and also Alexandra highlight the importance, for military purposes of fossil fuels and how, guaranteeing those supplies and having those indigenous resources in Ukraine were actually really beneficial, does that sort of change your view on, the focus that we should be placing on renewables, or is it sort of, commensurate with it?
I mean, we simply don't have fossil fuels in Europe. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It is geology, and we cannot do anything about it. Europe is a continent that is extremely poor when it comes to oil and gas. We are the only continent in the world that has chosen to rely on an energy source that it does not have. I mean, if you are American and you want to rely on oil and gas, I mean, it's a climate catastrophe, but at least you have it underground. If you're China and you decide to rely on coal, at least they have them underground. Like, we don't. The thing that we have, however, is wind, sun. We have the renewable energy sources in Europe, and that's why we need to rely on them, because those are the only sources that we actually have. But I wanted to come back to Olena's point on stockpiling. Sure. That's absolutely critical. Stockpiling the type of equipment that we need. But one thing, in order to be able to do that, is first to standardize that equipment. That is not the case today. NATO, by the way, has been very good at standardizing defense equipment. Maybe you should get into the business of standardizing transformers. But and so what happened during the full-scale invasion of 2022? So not during the full-scale invasion, but when Putin started to hit the Ukrainian electricity grid, so a bit later in 22, the Belgian minister Tina van der Straete wanted to send Belgian transformers to Ukraine to support it, just like Poland did, but she could not. Why? Because they were not interoperable. So the Polish transformers could actually go to Ukraine and be helpful, but if the Belgians had sent those transformers, the Ukrainians could not have done anything with it. So we need standardization, clearly, and we need the final thing, and it's very much like defense.
Are you pushing for that in Parliament or anything?
Sorry?
Are you pushing for that? Who's pushing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're working, especially my colleague Bruno Tolbach from the Social Democrats has been writing an electricity grids on initiative report that was adopted in Parliament about a year ago now. But that requires investment. Like, we need to make sure that our big companies like Nexans and many others have the capacity to invest. For them to have the capacity to invest, they need money. For them, they need to convince investors. To convince investors, they need to have predictability. And that's where the current EU Parliament, the choice to side with the far right is failing our industry. Because the moment when the EPP chooses to side with the far right is the moment where we create unpredictability. And so now we need to stop like that kind of adventure between the EPP and the far right that has lasted for 2 years. We need the EPP to go back to classic democratic values and say that the future is electrification. We do that across the board, from cars to electricity grids package to renewable energy to heat pump, and that will be the predictability signal that will allow our private companies to do the private investment we need for them to produce the cables, the batteries, the wind power tower, the transformers, all those equipment that are vital for our security.
Speaking of wind power, we have like very little time left. Do you have a parting statement? Or not statement?
The statement is very clear. We do not have the fossil fuels in Europe, but we have great conditions for the locations of the offshore wind farms. Offshore came from Europe because of the reason of the North Sea. We have great conditions to locate the new wind farms over there. With the water depth is not so big, and same we have on the Baltic Sea. So we have a great natural resource, which is offshore wind, and we need to use it right now to produce electricity for Europe and to work for Europe.
And what do you want? What do you need to
right now,
bring
what
this
we
vision
need
to life?
to change the declarations into the real projects, into the actions, and that's what Europe needs right now. We can deliver the electricity from the offshore wind quite fast, but the decision needs to be made. The system needs to be adapted very well to make the things running, to have a stability and predictability right now in the project execution. That's what Europe needs, and that's what the industry needs to have a new investments.
Parting salvo from NATO?
No, I think I agree with all what has been said. I think especially on stockpiling, that's super important. On standardization of equipment, that's very important. But we need also to stockpile fuel. I'm sorry, we are going to have the need for fuel for decades to come. Allies have been investing and are investing a lot in new capabilities. new tanks, new jets, and new ships, new submarines, and most of them are relying on fuel. So when we look at what's happening now in the Gulf, it's important, it's a stark reminder of the need to have enough fuel storage in Europe so that we are ready to deter and defend, because without fuel, you cannot ensure security of Europe.
Does that include indigenous resources? How much potential is there in them? In like one sentence.
They are also useful. I mean, we are also electrifying some of our capabilities. We are bringing hybrid engines to our capabilities, but that won't be enough.
Oh, I'm being told to finish up. Thank you very much to my panelists for a very interesting discussion. And my colleagues James Ferneyhoff, Nicolas Camus, Frederick Holovic will be back with you very soon with our Pro News Flash, and we'll be discussing how differently France and Germany are thinking about the energy crisis. So thank you very much to everyone.